What if the monsters haunting our dreams weren't just creatures of fiction, but shadows of our past? In 2025, Ryan Coogler's film Sinners transported audiences to a haunted juke joint in 1930s Mississippi, a place where spirits whisper, the blues bleed through the walls, and the sins of history claw their way back to life. It wasn't just a horror film, it was a reckoning. But behind the blood and myth was something much darker, something real. This is the story behind Sinners, the real-life vampires, the buried legends, and the painful truths that inspired one of the most unsettling Southern Gothic horrors in years. If there's one name that echoes through the blues like a haunting refrain, it's Robert Johnson. The legend says he stood at a Mississippi crossroads one midnight and made a deal with the devil, trading his soul for supernatural talent, and from that moment on, his music became immortal. Johnson's life was short and shrouded in mystery. His death, sudden, painful, and still unexplained, only deepened the myth. To many, he was the original American vampire, a man whose gifts came at a terrible price. Sinners draws on this legend heavily. Smoke and Stack are blues musicians haunted not just by spirits, but by the choices they make. Their music brings the vampires. It awakens what should have stayed buried. The film asks, what are we willing to trade for greatness? And what happens when the past refuses to stay silent? In Sinners, the crossroads aren't just a setting, they're a symbol. A place where history, pain, and temptation collide. Long before the Bible arrived on Southern soil, African spirituality thrived in its own rhythms, in drumming, dancing, ritual, and reverence for ancestors. When enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas, they carried these traditions with them, but they were forced underground, demonized, forgotten, or so the oppressors hoped. In Sinners, those traditions rise again, in the rituals that summon spirits, in the whispers of old gods, in the quiet defiance of black joy and grief. These aren't just superstitions, they're survival tactics, spiritual resistance. The film uses these elements not as exotic decoration, but as central truths. It honors the power of the unseen, the belief that those who've passed on still walk with us. That memory is a kind of magic, and that justice, when delayed, often comes wearing a different face. In Sinners, the supernatural isn't the enemy, it's the reckoning. The answer to prayers too long ignored. To bring this vision to life, director Ryan Coogler and production designer Hannah Beachler created a world that feels both ancient and urgent. They built two full-scale juke joints modeled after historic Mississippi architecture. Every plank, every candle, every faded photograph was chosen to reflect a layered, lived-in truth. Beachler studied the furniture of black Southern homes, the details of Delta churches, the language of color and shadow. Even the lighting in the film, half sun, half smoke, was meant to evoke duality, light and dark, life and death. But it wasn't just design. The actors, Michael B. Jordan among them, carried the weight of history in their performances. They weren't playing roles, they were channeling something older, something real. The film's score, blues with a sinister undercurrent, was composed to mirror that spiritual dissonance. Joy and terror, praise and warning. Nothing in Sinners is accidental. Every frame bleeds with intention. Some of the horrors behind Sinners are more literal than we'd like to believe. In the Jim Crow South, there were real-life monsters, men and women who committed unspeakable acts under the cover of law, faith, and tradition. There were disappearances, burned homes, songs that became elegies. Some historians believe the story of the Blood House, an abandoned plantation where dozens of black families vanished during the 1930s, inspired the film's central vampire den. No one was ever convicted. The records mysteriously vanished. Then there's the legend of the Night Whistler, a drifter who preyed on juke joints, luring musicians with promises of fame before they disappeared. Sinners doesn't confirm these sources, but the echoes are unmistakable, and perhaps that's the point. The most terrifying stories are the ones we refuse to remember. Sinners is more than a film. It's a mirror held up to a nation's forgotten past. A past soaked in blood, music, and silence. It's a tale of vampires, but not the ones with capes and coffins. These vampires wear suits, preach sermons, shake hands, drain spirits. By confronting these truths through art, We don't just scare ourselves, we awaken ourselves. Because the real horror is pretending none of it happened. If this story moved you, if it made you question what horror really means, help us keep uncovering the truth behind the fiction. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that haunt us. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones history tried to erase.